So in this video, we'll see all about closures. So we'll see how the closure gets formed in React and the various interrogations related to that, how to fix those closure related issues. So closure is a very popular interrogation related topic. So we'll see how it works in React. So there are plenty of articles. You can go through those if you want to learn more about basics of closure in JavaScript. There are also a lot of videos. So I will not be going through the basics again. So I'll just give you demo of how closure gets formed in React and how you can fix them. So let me show you. So here is the application I have created. I have created three components. So to indicate different types of closures. And this is the app component which is displaying this first closure. So you can see this component has a use effect hook and inside it I have set interval call. So once the component is loaded, after every 1 second I am printing the counter value. Initially counter value is 0 and I have a button to increment that count. So if I refresh the page, you can see initially counter is displayed its value. So let me open console. So you can see the counter is going on. So the counter value is 0. So if I click on increment counter, you can see counter value is updated to 1 on UI, but in console you can see it's still 0. So no matter how many times I click, you see this counter value of only 0. You will never see this updated value. So why this is happening? So here, even if I increment the counter inside the set interval, it is not able to print that updated counter. So here is the closure is getting formed. So whenever you have some function which you are defining as a callback function like in for the set interval or you are some event handler, in that case closure gets formed if you are using some outside variable. So this counter variable is not inside this function, so it's not declared inside this function. So whenever the function is created, this function is created, what is the value of counter? So at that time the counter value was 0. So this function always remembers that 0 value, so it will never get that new value. So closure is a function which remember its value at the time of creating that function. So always it will be 0. But I don't want this 0 to be printed. So how can I fix that? So this use effect hook executes only once when the first time this component is loaded, because we have not provided any dependency here. It's empty dependency. So now we can, whenever we change the counter, we can instruct this use effect hook to re-render. So I can provide this counter as a dependency. So whenever the counter changes, this set interval code will again execute, will add another, this function will execute and will have that updated value. So let's see if it fix that. So now initially you can see counter is 0. It's always 0. But now when I increment the counter, you can see now counter is 1 here, but it's again 0 here. So what is happening? So if I clear this and click this button multiple times, you can see there are a lot of console.logs happening and we don't get the clear consistent result. So why this is happening? So whenever the counter changes, we are again recreating this interval. So it's very important whenever you create interval in JavaScript or React, you should clear that before again recreating it. So whenever this use effect gets executed, first I want to clear this interval created by this set interval function. So I can store that in a variable. And here I can call this clear interval and pass that interval. So now this callback function, whichever we have written, this gets executed every time before re-executing this use effect hook. So whenever the counter changes, first this code will be executed and then this code will be executed. So I can print here inside cleanup. So if I refresh this, so you can see counter is printing 0. So this cleanup function will execute when the component is unmounted, like this component is not displayed, as well as whenever the counter changes and you are re-executing this code. So now if I click on this increment counter, you can see insert cleanup is printed and then again the counter value is this. So this code executes and then you are setting that interval. So after every 1 second, this code will again execute. And if you see now, this correctly prints the value of 1, which is displayed here. Now if I increment this couple of times, you can see this counter is 5 and now you correctly see this counter of 5. So you are correctly getting that value. So that closure issue is fixed. So what we are doing, So this cleanup function is very important. So instead of recreating these intervals again and again, we first clear that interval and then recreate this. And now whenever the counter changes, you have that updated value of the counter, because this function will get created and it will have that updated value of the counter. So this use effect hook will only execute whenever the counter value changes. And when it changes, you are again creating interval and you are having that updated value. So this way you can easily fix that closure issue. So whenever you are using set interval or set timeout, or you are adding event listener, and in that function, callback function, you have some variable which is declared outside. So that time the closure gets created, and that value will be the initial value. It will not be the updated value. So even if the value is updated later, it will still print the original value. So using this way, you can easily fix this closure issue. So now you can see when I click this, you correctly print that counter. So after every 1 second, this code gets executed and you are seeing this updated. So this is the first example, first closure issue. So this is the interview question, how to fix this particular issue of closure. And also when you are working with your large application, you should be familiar with this closure issue. So you will not face this issue and you will not see unexpected result. So this was first case. Now we have the second closure. So let's import this second closure. Now if I refresh this page, you can see it's exactly same. So what is the difference here? So now instead of doing console.log, I have this set counter function and I am incrementing this counter by 1. So let's see. So when I initially counter is 0, and when I increment after 1 second, you see this counter of 1, because this set timeout call we are using. We are not using set interval. So this will execute whatever code we have written inside this function will only execute once after 1 second. So once we click on this button, this function will be executed and we are setting a timeout. So after 1 second, we are updating that counter to 1. So we are calling set counter function. So once we set the state, the component will re-render and you will see that updated value. So every time I click after 1 second, you will see that updated value. So it works. But what will happen if I click this button multiple times? So if I click, you can see I have clicked multiple times, but it's incremented only by 1. So you can see I am clicking it, but it's incremented only by 1. It's not incremented by multiple times. Whatever I clicked 4 times, it should increment by 4, right? So again, here is the closure. So as I said, whenever you are using passing a callback function and where you are using some outside variable, it creates a closure. So if I print this counter value here, let's see what is the counter. So when I refresh and click on this, after 1 second, you will see counter is 0. Now again, when I increment after 1 second, you can see you get counter of 1. So the current value is 2 and you are getting the previous value. If I again increment this counter, you can see the counter is 2. So you get the previous value. So what is happening here? When this particular code is executed, at that time the initial counter value is 0. So it increments 0 plus 1. So if you don't understand this, you can check out my previous video, which is linked here. So you will better understand. So no matter how many times you set this counter, the current counter value is still 0 initially. So it will always be 0 plus 1, it will be 1. Now again, the counter value, the state is still not updated. So when you call set state, the component will re-render after executing all the code from that particular function. So the counter value is still 0. So 0 plus 1 is 1. Here also 0 plus 1 is 1. So every time you click this button, set interval, set timeout is called. So your value is still 1. So you are not incrementing by multiple times. So no matter how many times you are calling, so it always increments by 1. So to how to fix this particular issue? So to fix this issue, you need to remember that whenever you are setting state inside set timeout or set interval, always use the updater syntax. So there are two syntaxes of setting state. This is one syntax. So for that particular function, you directly pass the value. Another syntax is you pass a function, and this function will receive the previous counter value. And from that, you can return whatever you want to do. So I want to increment that counter. So previous counter plus 1. So if I save this and refresh, you can see when I click, you get this one value. If I click on this, you can see you again get that updated value. So every time you click, you get that updated value. So this works. So you can see this is working. So it's exactly same as previous code. But what is the difference? Now, whenever you are using this way of updating the state using updater function, so this is known as updater function outside state. So you can watch this video if you are not aware of this, so you will get better understand this. So now whenever you have, so previously we have seen this way. So if you have multiple set calls, it will always be one. But if I use this particular syntax, so we can also simplify this. So instead of, this is a single statement, so you don't need to open curly bracket. For the arrow function, you can directly return this value. So this is implicitly returned. So now I can duplicate this and I will comment out this. So previously with this code, it always increments by 1. But now with this code, let's see what happens. So when I increment this counter, you can see now counter value is 4. It's not 1. Because now you are having updater syntax. So all these statements will be queued. Set state will be queued, and during next render, React will check what is the current value. So if you are not aware of this, again check this linked video. So you'll better understand. So every time before executing the next set state or next set counter, it checks the what is the previous counter. So current previous counter initially is 0. So this will be 0 plus 1, it will be 1. Now during this set counter, what is the value of previous counter? The previous counter value is 1. So 1 plus 1, it will become 2. This will become 3 and this will become 4. So now every time you click on that button, after 1 second, this code will be executed. Now the value will be 1. So it will, every time you click on that button, the value will be incremented by 4. So let me show you again. So initially it's 0. When I click, the value is 4. When I again click, value is 8. So every time you click, you increment by 4. So this is another thing you need to remember. So this is again creating a closure. So how to fix this? So whenever you are using set timeout, set interval, always use the updater syntax. So you will never face such type of issues of closure. So here in the first case also you can use that previous syntax. So here we don't have any state, but if you are setting state, always use the updater set syntax. So this issue of closure happens only if you are using state. So if you are updating state inside that particular function. So if I'm not using state, I can also use ref. So I can say counter ref. I can use the use ref hook and initial value of 0. Now whenever I click on this, I will set counter ref dot current equal to, what is the current value? Plus 1. So this is exactly same. Now instead of using state, I'm using ref. So ref is a mutable object. So and closures are not happened when you are using ref. So ref are away from that closure. So whenever you are using state, closure will happen, but when you are using ref, closure will not happen. So let me print this counter value, current counter value. And if I refresh, when I click, you can see current value is 1. When I again click, you can see the value is updated. So you don't get the previous value, you correctly get the current value. So you can see when I click it multiple times, you correctly get that updated value of counter. So you don't get the previous value, you always get that updated value. So closure never happens if you are using ref. So it's a common issue of closure. So whenever you are working with Firebase, it's common issue of closure. So whenever you are using Firebase real-time updates, you will see this closure happening. So whenever you set state, even after setting the states, the state does not get updated because it always remembers the previous value. So to fix this issue, always use ref. If you are using, anytime you think closure are formed and your state is not getting updated properly, even you are setting that value, that means that closures are getting formed. So instead of using state, you can use a ref here. So whenever you set a ref, that will be have that updated value. But when you set a ref, the component will not re-render. So you need some way to re-render that component. So if you want to display that value, updated value on the UI. So if whenever you are facing some issue of closure, use ref. So this is how you can fix that issue of counter not getting updated. So now if anytime I click on this button, you will see that updated counter value. That is all about the second clone. Now this is example of third clone. Now let me import the third closure here. And what we are doing here, let me refresh. Now you can see I have start countdown from value. So I have a drop down. So I can select that drop down value and that is the counters getting set. So let me show you the code. So I have this drop down. Whenever I select value, any value, this set counter function is getting called, which is the state, and I'm setting that selected value. Now, whenever I click on start countdown, this start countdown function will be executed, and I want to start that countdown from that value. So, say from whatever value I have selected. So, if I select 5, so the countdown should start from 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, like that. So, whatever value I am selecting, if I select 20, the countdown should start from 20. So, 20, 19, 18, like that. It should count in the opposite order. So that's what I want. So for that, I have written set interval function. So inside this set interval, I'm checking if counter is greater than 0, then I'm setting that counter to counter minus 1. So if it's 20, it will become 20 minus 1, it will become 19. So this will happen continuously because we are using set interval. So after every 1 second, this counter value will decrement, and when the counter reaches 0, then I'm clearing that interval. So that is the code this code is doing, but it's not working as expected. So let me show you. So when I select this 5 and click on start countdown, you can see it's starting 4, but now it's not counting down after 4. It's still 4. So you can see I'm set checking here. Counter is greater than 0. It should execute this, right? Because I'm using set interval. So let me add console.log inside and let me refresh. So when I select this and click on this, you can see inside is printed. So after every 1 second, this code inside the set interval is getting executed. That means the code is coming here. So why the counter is not getting updated? So if I print the counter value and refresh, now when I select 5, start countdown, you can see inside value is 5. It's always 5. It's not changing. So if I select different value, let's say 15. So now counter is 15. I will click on start count. You can see inside it's 15. It's not changing. It's always 15. So off here also closure is getting formed. So as I said, inside callback function, you are using some outside variable. So this variable will be remembered. So this function will remember the value of this counter variable at the time of creation of this particular function. So once you click on this countdown, start countdown button, this function executes. You are starting this interval. And once you start that interval, at that time, the counter value, what is the counter value? That will always be remembered. So no matter how many times this function is getting executed, the counter value will remain the same, which is selected at that time. So now if I select the value of, let's say 20 and click on start countdown, you can see the value is remain 20. So when I click on that button, this code will execute. At that time, this function will execute and that function has counter value of 20. So what I selected at that time, so it's 20, so it becomes 20. So this code will execute. I'm checking. So 20 is greater than 0, so it will become 20 minus 1, 19. So you can see 19 is printed. But next time when this code is executed, the counter value is still 20, it's not 19 because this is a closure. So the closure gets created inside this function and counter will always be 20. So you are always checking counter 20 is greater than 0, yes. So you are again setting it to 19. So you are always setting it to 19, you are not decrementing that. So how to fix this issue? So first thing is whenever we are setting that interval, we need to clear that interval before re-executing this code. So if I change this to 5, click on start countdown, you can see it's printing 1920, 1920. If I select this, that's a 10. Start countdown, you can see it's printing 1920. So it's increased, so which is not correct because every time you click on that button, you are recreating this interval. So again, you need to clear that interval first before creating again. So how to clear this? So we have seen that clear interval. So before starting, I can use clear interval function. But how to access this variable is declared below. So what you can do is you can use ref again. So I can call interval ref equal to useref. So let's say initial value of -1. So this center interval returns a number which can be anything. So I'm initializing it with -1. You can also initialize with null if you want. So now I will set here interval ref dot current equal to whatever value returned by this set interval function. Now here I will use interval ref dot current. So before executing this function again, I am clearing that interval and then again starting. So this is good thing. And as I said, whenever you set ref, the component will not re-render. So you don't have extra render. So you can check out my this article if you want to learn more about useref hook and why it's more useful. So if you are not using any value directly inside the child component or not passing to any child component, you should not use state. You should always use ref, which is good for performance reason. So now with this updated value, let's verify. So when I select 5 start countdown, you can see inside 5 is printed. Now if I change it 15 start countdown, you can see inside 4 is printed. So you don't see alternate values. So now I'm in 20. If I select this, you always see 3. You will not see that different value. So now you are not recreating extra intervals. So every time before creating this interval again, you are removing that previous, you are clearing that previous interval, so which is good thing, but we have not fixed that previous issue. So when I select this, the counter value is 4. Now it does not decrement. So how to fix this? So we have seen closure is created inside this function. So this counter value remains as it is, the value at that time. So what is closure is the function, whatever value you are using inside that function at the time of function creation, what is the value, so that value will be remembered. Always it will be the same. So whenever I select this value, let's say 10, and now the counter value is 10. So when I click on start countdown button, this function will execute and this callback function will execute. And at that time, what is the counter value? Counter value is 10. So it will always be 10. So when I click start countdown, 10 minus 1 is 9. Now every time the counter value is still 10. So 10 minus 1 is 9. Always 9 will be set. So how can I fix this? So to fix this, as I said, whenever you are using set counter or you are setting state inside set interval, set timeout or any callback function, always use the updater syntax. So I can use that previous count. You can call it anything. So I can call it counter also. So this is the previous counter. So let's call it previous also. So I can call it previous. So now what is previous? Previous. So we are setting counter. So previous will be the previous counter. So now we are using this updater syntax. So whenever this function gets called, it will always have that previous value. It will not have that previously remembered value. So here you will still see that previous value printed here, but this previous will always get that updated value. So let me write it in longer form and I can print the previous value. So now when I select 5, click on start countdown, you can see inside is 5, previous is 5. Now previous is correctly getting updated. You can see every time the function is called, you are correctly having inside is 5, still 5 because closure is formed. So I am printing this counter value, which will always be same. But inside this function, you always get the previously updated value. You can see you always get that decremented value. So let me show you. If I select 10, and click on the button, you will get 9, then 8, then 7. You correctly get that value. So now you don't have that issue. You can see this value is correctly getting updated. So if I select 15, start countdown, now you can see this value is correctly getting updated. So you don't have closure issue now. So you correctly have that value. But now the counter is going to 0 and it's going to negative value. You can see now it's 0, now it's -1. So I don't want to continue. So once it reaches 0, I want to stop that value. So how can I do that? So I have written this code, but it's not working because this counter value is a closure value. So it always remains the same. So how can you fix this value? So as we have seen here, this previous will always get the updated value. So instead of checking this condition outside, we can check it inside here. So let me remove this code, and inside this function, I can check if previous value is greater than 0, then return previous minus 1. Otherwise, clear that interval. So what is the clear interval? Interval ref dot curve. And you can also return the previous value if you want, because inside state you always return some value. So now if the value is greater than 0, you are returning value minus 1. And if it's 0, that means this condition will not satisfy. It will clear that interval and you return that updated value. So now let's restart. And when I click on 5, start countdown, you can see now it's 4, 3, 2, 1, now 0. And now you can see it stopped. This console.log is not getting displayed, which means this code is not getting executed because we have executed this clear interval. So let me show you. So if I select this 10, now when I click on start countdown, the code will execute and you will see the different value inside getting printed. So this is still counter, which is the previous value. So let me move this inside and I will print it here. So now if I select this 10, start counter, you will correctly see that updated value. You can see. So the set interval is going on. But once it reaches 0, it will stop. You can see. Now it's inside 0 and now we are not getting that console. So we correctly have fixed that closure issue. So now if I select this 20, start countdown, now it will start counting from 20, 19. So it will keep counting until that value. And no matter how many times you call this function, you always get this value by 1. So you are not recreating this interval again because first you are clearing that interval. Once it reaches 0, you will see that timer is stopped. So this is how you can fix that closure issue. So first thing you need to remember, whenever inside any function, callback function, you are using some outside variable, at that time the closure will get created and it will always remember the value which was there at the time of that function creation, not while the function is getting called. So no matter how many times you call the function, while creating that function, what was the value, that value will always be same. So it will be remembered. So to fix this, whenever you are setting state inside callback function, always use the updater syntax, never use the direct value passing syntax. And another thing is you can also use a ref. So whenever you set ref, you will not face closure related issue. So inside this callback function, whatever you have, you will always get that updated value. So these a ref, whatever you are creating, the use ref always give you mutable object, which is free from closure issues. Closure issues does not happen when you are using ref. So if you don't want to set state, use ref. So whenever you set ref, you will correctly get that updated. So these are the three different closure issues you will face. So these are interview questions, how to fix this closure issue. And you will also face these issues when you are working on large projects, industry projects. So whenever you see that you are setting some state value and still you are not getting that updated value in the render. So whenever you print that in the render, it's not printing that value which you are setting in that the state. So that means somewhere the closure is getting created. So to fix that issue, first thing is always use the updater syntax. So set state updater syntax, this syntax. Another is use ref. So using this way, you can easily fix those issues. And also never forget whenever you are setting interval, always clear that interval. So here, before starting, I am clearing that interval. So this is not a use effect hook. So I am not returning function from here. So you can return function only from the use effect hook, where you can clear that interval. So if you are passing a dependency here, then this code will always execute before re-executing that effect. So if I don't pass this dependency, this function will only execute one before unmounting this component when you are displaying some another component. But when you pass a dependency, before executing this effect again, this cleanup function will execute. So this cleanup function will always execute before executing this effect again, which is a good thing. So you can clear whatever interval you have started. Or if you are adding some event listener, you can remove those event listener. So I have already explained this in my React course. So you can go through the link description where I have explained how different types of memory leaks can happen. So this is known as memory leak. So when you don't clear this, it will remain in the memory and even the component is unmounted, your code is still getting executed. So that memory leak will happen. There are various scenarios where the memory leak can happen. So I have covered different types of scenarios where these memory leaks can happen. So it's around 1 hour video. So both class component as well as functional component, you will see how different types of memory leaks can happen and how you can fix that. So if you are interested, you can check out my free React course of Learn React in 30 days. Link in the description. So that's it about this video. So I hope you are clear about how closure can happen and how to fix those issues. These are very popular interview questions. So if you found this video useful, do like it and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.